has the courage of her convictions.
My evidence is that at times she certainly does have that. She tells him no a couple of times. So she certainly does have that. What my evidence says is that her response is at times ambiguous. Sometimes she's able to say particular things, at other times she isn't. That is consistent with some of the experience I've had with other complainants. I don't try to read myself into a situation.
No, I agree.
Or assume that what I should do is what everybody else should do.
Yeah, all I'm saying too is that you cannot dispute the fact that actually she is just like you. She may just be like you, strong moral rectitude, courage of her convictions, and is not scared actually of authority. Would you be surprised if you found that out?
I wouldn't be. I mean, I think it takes enormous courage to actually come here.
Yes.
And it takes, so that is to be admired. And sometimes people might not have that initially. It may come to them precisely through difficult situations.
I fully agree with you. So it may not be entirely accurate that she's this childlike person who cannot speak her mind.
I think when I use the term childlike, it's not necessarily about speaking with mind. It's about position.
It's fine.
Respect. Who do you defer to? Who do you respect? What is the appropriate way in which you approach somebody? It's not necessarily lacking courage. It's just that I think as we go through life, we learn that you don't use F words to your CEO. That would not be considered appropriate. So it's more like if we fulfill or live or occupy certain roles in life, that's often how we are supposed to engage with each other. And I'll give an example now. Your role is that of the defense attorney. Mine is that of a witness. And so you expect me to answer in particular ways in terms of that role as Advocate Budlander fulfills her role. So there are ways in which we can and can't respond to each other. As when you say to me, I mustn't be sarcastic, you're telling me I'm not fulfilling the role of witness. That's my point, is that there are roles which kind of shape how that we are expected to behave.
You put me in my place there. Right. So, all I'm saying to you is that you will agree with me that without having spoken to her, knowing her intentions, the tribunal must take the things you say about her, not as wrong, but as generalizations. They are not specific to her. You don't know her intentions when she said something.
What I'm offering the tribunal, and again, as I said, it's for them to take it or leave it, is what I read from this, how it can be interpreted. I'm not offering holy writ here. I'm saying this is how it can be interpreted on the basis of my experience with other complainants.
And that we did establish with you yesterday that because you did not look at her cross-examination where her assumptions, her statements were tested and where she made certain concessions. You have no access to the concessions she made.
I did look at them yesterday.
And we'll get there. I'm talking about when you provided us with your report. I knew you were going to say you had a look last night. All I'm saying to you is that when you provided this report and you gave evidence, not when I reminded you that you didn't look at it, when you gave this report and gave your evidence in chief, you had not had a look at her concessions and how and when her testimony was tested.
Actually, I stated up front that I hadn't gone through the cross-examination in great detail.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Sikhakhane, I think I'm going to go back to something which is important here. To the previous question you asked. Mr. Sikhakhane said to the following fact: because you had not interviewed her as a person, the tribunal should then look at what you said as generalized, as a generalized opinion, because you never interviewed her, you can't zoom onto her. Well, what you said were general remarks in general terms and not specific to her. I think that is the essence of the question.
My comments are based on what I read here. And how I understand or see what she is saying. From what I'd also looked at in terms of the her evidence in chief as well. That is how it was understood, and what was done was, what I was trying to do was contextualize her evidence as well in terms of what I am familiar with in terms of other complainants. Hence the broader explanatory framework of this is how sexual harassment is understood, this is how complainants can be understood, and then in light of that general contextual background, this is how one can read what she is saying or not saying here, and how she is responding.
I interrupted you, Mr. Sikhakhane, sorry.
Well, I'll go back there, but the point I was making is not that you wrong and make, all we're saying is that those are generalizations, not incorrect ones. They are generalizations about cases of sexual harassment. But of course, if we must make a choice between your generalizations and her words and what she says, both in those communications and even here at the tribunal, we've got to accept that yours are generalizations, may or may not apply to her.
She is ultimately the authority on her experience, and her what she says is what must ultimately be what you take. This is a way to try and understand what she's saying.
And I'm saying this because you must be aware, as sympathetic as we should be, but you must be aware this is a 42-year-old woman, right? Whose words must be respected, don't you agree?
Like any other woman's.
Yeah. Whose intelligence must be respected.
Correct.
This is someone who knows what she says and thinks what she says. You agree with me?
Correct.
And there is no reason it would be patronizing for all of us in the room, including you, to assume that she's a child whose actions and words must be interpreted by some either superior male or superior other woman. We must believe what she says. Don't you agree with me?
No, because I think you're misinterpreting what I mean but when I say childlike. And I repeat again that I'm talking about a position in relation to the judge. I'm not talking about somebody who's actually a child, should be thought of as a child. It's more like positions of authority.
Yes, no, I know.
It's not about people's mental capacity. It's not about their abilities. It's about the degree of respect or deference you are expected to show somebody when you are positioned in a particular role. It's not that that person is a child and you treat them as a child.
If you found out, and I'm not going to make it specific, if you found out that a complainant, not the complainant, a complainant has a history of belligerence towards a senior person, would you still hold the same view?
It would depend. You'd want to know about that history. You'd want to know how it unfolded. You would have to take a whole lot of factors into account.
What would you take into effect? If you say someone fears authority, and I demonstrate to you that that complainant actually does not fear authority by action, does not, would it change how you look at them? Would it change how your generalized opinion that they fear authority, maybe that's why they don't say certain things?
It would depend on the circumstances. So if it's in a workplace setting and you are contesting over workplace issues, that's one thing. It's a different thing if you are contesting, where you have guidance around grievance and other kinds of procedures. And I mean, a situation, let's use the courtroom situation, where that person may or may not be your line manager, you can contest with them. Somebody who has a higher authority than, say, your immediate line manager, for whom you might have greater respect, that may be different. I mean, the way you respond to people can also depend on the degree of respect you have for them and the degree of liking you may have for someone. You can be it's possible that you can look at people as being complex. You can both admire them and dislike what they do. And that feeling perhaps of admiration or respect can come into conflict with the feelings of anger.
I'm going to repeat this question because I see what you're doing. I'm saying to you, when you make an assumption that someone fears authority and therefore that's why you should not believe them when they say yes, you not believe them when they say this. When I give you an example that a particular complainant has exhibited a propensity different from your assumption, which is actually does not fear authority, would it impact on your assumptions about them specifically? I know your generalized view, but I'm saying, would it not affect your analysis?
I would certainly want to look at it.
Would it impact your analysis at all?
It would depend on on the information.
If the information is that actually this person, this complainant has actually even physically confronted a line manager, a supervisor, what would you do? Would you still interpret them as, I'm giving you a practical example.
I would want to know more about the circumstances, because what it might indicate is somebody who has difficulty with conflict and conflict resolution, somebody who veers between. You can have somebody who is very aggressive under some circumstances. You have people who are passive-aggressive. People can shift between different things. So I would want to have a look at those details to see how do they add up.
All right, I'll leave this question. I think I'm not going to get the answer you don't like. Let me move to the paper that we were dealing with yesterday, just for one point, for its conclusion. Let me first ask, you are before this tribunal as an expert in what? Sexual harassment, power in general as a notion, as an academic notion, or psychology or emojis?
Definitely not psychology, definitely not emojis. My expertise is in gender-based violence. So I'm assuming that's why the tribunal thought I could add to a view on sexual harassment. And if you look at most of the theorization on gender-based violence, it is rooted in an understanding of power. So the two are related.
So
one underpins the other.
It's fine, it's fine. So where we find you saying an emoji means deferring, but an emoji specialist says it's flirtatious, we should believe not you, but the expert on emojis.
Yes.
All right. Because you touch on the subject of power, I want to take you to this paper, just one conclusion, and then we'll move to the theory of power. You will see that the paper you referred to by Graham and Papudi, right at the end, one of the things they say, and it relates to the subject you ventured into, and my learned friend started there, is power relations. And the conclusion they make is that although they were dealing with young people in depressed economic environments, but they say the findings presented in this article demonstrate that while dominant, patriarchal, essentialist notions of masculinity and femininity strongly shape the gender identities of the young men and women in these studies, and in turn their sexuality, their negotiation of gender identity and sexuality is also contested and fluid. Right? And I mean, what this does is that it tells us, and I think you will agree with me, that it tells us that power relations are not static. Would you agree with me? That they are fluid, you don't have to agree. It's a notion by Farquhar. You may believe in the other theorists on power, that power is everywhere. It means it moves. Would you think in relational power relations that's the case as well?
My PhD does deal with Foucault, where I've looked a great deal at his notions of power as diffuse and its multiple forms.
Yes.
So I think when we look at this, and this is what I was trying to explain, we should not be thinking of power in blunt and one-dimensional terms. That we must think about it as multidimensional, and you may have heard me saying it is dynamic. It is built on the interactions between each other. Foucault's other point is that there is discourse. which shapes us into particular ways and means it makes it difficult to break out of discourse. So the examples I am using when I speak about things like assumptions about male and female sexuality, those are discourses.
Yeah.
They are powerful discourses that trap us, in which people read us through those discourses. They take on a certain solidity even though they don't necessarily have it. So that is certainly the way I would be thinking about power. That is why I do distinguish between formal and informal power, because you cannot ignore that there is formal power. There is informal power. There is an acknowledgement that people find ways to resist and to exercise agency within their particular roles or however they may be. But yes, it is important to take a complex notion of power that recognizes how it shifts and does alter, but that you also, and this is an area where Foucault has been critiqued, is that sometimes he speaks about power in such diffuse terms, you can't actually realize where its center is and how you deal with it. And one must still explain things like workplace jobs and rules and formality, the way power is working in this room at multiple levels. So yes, there are multiple ways to look at power. That's my very long way to say it.
Once again, we agree. Yeah, I was just saying to you, because human relations and power, in fact, we'll deal with that, because that's as you say, I'm not an expert in Foucault and power. I just thought it's something you could enlighten us, because I think, and you've done that. All I was saying to you is that you would agree with me that when you're looking at engagement between two people, it's a mistake to think that power remains in the same place as formally established in the relations between two people. It can shift.
That's my point about it being dynamic.
Yeah. So even between someone that you think they are in a childlike father relationship, and I'm not mocking the point, because it's an important point you make, but I'm saying even in those relations, power can shift between two people, someone who's known to be powerful, dealing with someone who's formally less powerful, but in their interaction, power can shift from the formally powerful to the formally powerless.
That can happen, and I think my evidence was that you can see things shifting between them, and you can see a change in the nature of the interactions, and you can see, particularly after a particular date, that they have changed. So quite clearly, things have altered, and the fact that somebody makes a complaint shows that things are shifting.
Yes, and you're so right that can shift even during a conversation itself, or during, let's call it a relationship, right? And it can happen during courting, flirting. In any form of relationship, that can happen. Friendship, romance, marriage.
Yeah, relationships are dynamic.
Yes. Well, you also ventured into advice on something that I'm definitely sure you're not an expert on. You said you would have advised, or you would, if the JP was interested in the complainant, he should have approached it differently. You remember that? Is this an area you're an expert in? The area of courting in his culture or their culture? Is it something we should take your word on, that of suggesting to a Xhosa man how he should engage in courting? Is it something that we should take as your expertise?
No, and I'm not offering it to him. I'm not offering him advice in terms of his love life. My commentary was based on policy work in relation to sexual harassment and workplace relations. That was the context in which the advice was offered, and it has been, in some of the work that I've done on sexual harassment, we put that into policy. So this was in the context of talking about workplace relations, because you have, as I pointed out, a blurring going on here.
You even said that he must at least seek permission from his wife.
Well, I was saying, in the context of a workplace, it would be difficult if we're saying it needs to be regulated and you need to put forward that you are interested in somebody. That's going to be, in his situation, somewhat difficult if he is already married. I'm acknowledging that that might be somewhat difficult if you put that into a policy where you ask, which has been done, where you regulate relationships.
Yeah, all I'm saying to you is that you are venturing into advising somebody about something that is well embedded in particular regions, particular cultures, particular languages. And it's not your area.
My advice was in relation to how do you manage relations in the workplace.
Yeah, but you were also advising, you were talking about what he should have done if he's interested in a woman.
That is in relation to the workplace.
Yes, but I'm saying you were not talking about work. You were talking about how he should approach a woman. It doesn't matter where.
No, my comments were restricted to the workplace. It's
So
it's not appropriate for me to be mentioning what he should be doing outside the workplace. But we are talking about a workplace scenario and what is recommended you ought to be thinking about or considering within a workplace context.
I agree with you. But all I'm saying to you is that you agreed with me yesterday, and I told you that you were the expert of last resort, because what was needed was someone who has the cultural and linguistic nuances to understand a couple of things. One, the conversation between two people of a particular culture. Secondly, assumptions about how courting, let's call it dating how it happens in particular cultures. And you agreed with me that cultural and linguistic nuances are important in analyzing what's appropriate and what's not.
That is correct, but again, we're talking about what is appropriate in the workplace.
Yes, no, I'm with you. I'm saying whether we're going to get there, whether dating someone who you work with or someone you don't work with, all I'm saying to you is that we established that culturally and linguistically, things vary from, well, how people do things can be influenced by the dominant culture and linguistic nuances in that culture. You agree with me?
That I agree with you, but I don't take your previous point, which I think you're trying to connect, that means that in the workplace, that alters relations, allows relations to happen in a particular place. There are different rules that govern a workplace. That is my point.
That's fine. What advice would you give the complainant, as you gave the respondent in the same situation?
When faced with a situation like
Faced
this?
with someone who's flirting.
Well, one would sit and talk to her and ask with her, what does she feel comfortable with? What does she not feel uncomfortable with? Is she able to approach him? What might be difficult about approaching him?
Okay.
If these and these are the difficulties, what are the ways in which we might get around those difficulties? How else could this be addressed? Could somebody intervene on her behalf and go and speak to him? If she's not yet at a point where she is ready to lay a grievance or go to human resources or whatever it is, what else can she do? In some situations where somebody doesn't feel they're able to do anything, you will advise them to keep a diary of interactions so that they know what is going on and that they don't forget what is going on, because if this should ever go to trial, they would need to know what they would need to be able to know and what to remember. You would look at ways in which you could try to assist them to feel more assertive, to find out what kind of support they have. If they feel they cannot do anything about it, then to ask, do you have anyone who can support you, who can help you, assist you? How can we help you? Would counseling support you in order to be able to feel more confident? So you would look at what is it that the person can manage? What is it that you can realistically ask them to do? Somebody who is in a very difficult workplace situation, you just have to take into account what is that person capable of and explore with them what their options are.
Am I wrong, Ms. Vetten, that, and I'm not wrong, am I wrong to assume that in your testimony, and as it is in your papers, correctly so, you are more sympathetic towards a complainant, not a complainant?
That is my background.
Yes.
I have been a counsellor.
Okay. Yeah, no,
And
I'm
I'm there to assist. That is the
the
basis of it.
complainants. Yeah, okay. Would you think that kind of stance, I told you where I wouldn't be a good expert yesterday, because I wouldn't be objective. Do you think that stance makes you objective or not objective?
Well, as I'm sure you're familiar, there is a great deal of contestation around what the word objective means.
No, yeah, I know.
But
You can lecture me about it.
no, I'll spare you that.
Okay.
So I think my experience is with complainants. The reasons why people have asked me to be an expert in other situations or to come and give testimony is for the simple reason that gendered forms of violence have a long history, and excuse me if I'm sorry if I'm lecturing
No, it's fine.
you.
No, it's fine.
They have a long history of having been overlooked, having been neglected, having been downplayed, having been dismissed. Our Constitution has tried to do that. We have constitutional court cases that try to recognize this. So one of the ideas behind expert testimony is that in a context where women's experiences have been routinely dismissed and where they have not been recognized and where the law has not been able to accommodate them and where they may be unfamiliar, sometimes you may need somebody who has that kind of particular background or knowledge to come and say, within the context of what we know, this is how somebody may behave. It's to give context, because quite often what can happen is that people may think women's responses are simply bizarre, or they don't understand them, they don't make sense. So the idea is to have somebody who can say, well, based on the background, based on the experience, based on what we think about power relations, this is how it can be understood.
I agree with you, but that makes you, and which you are, by the way, and the good one, is you are an advocate for women's issues, which is correct. In fact, you are an advocate. No one does it like you do in this country for 30 years. You are an advocate for complainants of sexual harassment. That I accept. But all I'm saying is that let me put this danger to you, because I put it to myself, that if I were to testify in matters where I must choose between African people and others, I would refuse because I have a particular affinity. And I would refuse because I would not resist the temptation of not being objective. And all I'm saying to you is that, well, with that background, which is not a bad background, do you agree with me that a person like you and me who have strong views about a particular side of things can actually sacrifice objectivity and present views that are filled with their own feelings and idiosyncrasies?
I would hope not, because as I said to you earlier, I sit on panels, and I am required to adjudicate on matters, and there have been cases where I have not been, where looking at the evidence, you cannot find somebody guilty of sexual harassment. Yeah. There have also been occasions where I've been asked to comment on someone's behavior, and I've had to say, there is no sexual harassment. Yes. So I have an insight and experience, but that doesn't mean I automatically come to something assuming.
Yeah, no, I'm not making that accusation against you. I'm just saying that where objectivity is required, and I'll go to the things that I think you omitted yesterday, and I will tell you why I think you omitted them, and you can differ with me. First of all, if we move to one of the assumptions you made yesterday when I conclude this thing about culture, is that you said something very powerful, that a yes is not a yes in perpetuity. Am I summarizing your view? Is a no in perpetuity?
No, not necessarily. However, if we look at the law does say that it is no until such time. It is no until somebody says something different, but one must bear in mind where that is not an invitation. This is where the line becomes one you have to think about very carefully. That if somebody says no, it doesn't mean you keep on coming back, because then you are repeated. Somebody said to you no. If you keep coming back after they've said no, that is repeated, and then you are running into harassment.
So actually, you are saying to me, a no is a no in perpetuity. Really?
Yes, unless somebody comes to you and says, I've changed my mind.
Yes. And if I told you that expert evidence you've just given doesn't take into account a number of cultural practices, prevailing cultural practices about courting, and I'm going to give you a couple of words. You should know them because you are an expert. You've ventured in. Let's take it in Xhosa. The word "uqhasa." Are you familiar with it?
No.
Are you familiar with the Zulu word "ukushela"?
I've heard it.
Are you familiar with the word, it's another Xhosa word, "ukuphimisa"?
No, I've not spent time in the Eastern Cape, so I'm afraid
All right.
I'm not going to be able to recognize Xhosa.
But, okay, let me help you with what they connote. It's an exercise of courting between two people. As you said, it's men, usually. In fact, it's frowned upon, I think, if it's not a man. But let's say, as Dinoa told us, it happens. Would you differ with me when I say those three words emerging from those particular cultures? We can criticize those cultures if we like. In them, they connote and involve persistence, pleading. In fact, the word "ukushela", even outside courting, is suggested to mean pleading with somebody.
That may well be correct.
Yeah, so I'm saying when you are not aware of particular cultural notions, you can miss in language a discussion between two people of a particular culture if your interpretation comes, one, from a position of ignorance of their cultural exchange, their culture, right? Or you come from a position of what you would call a superior culture. It means a culture that assumes, usually Eurocentric, that its understanding of things, including romance, must be universal. And I'm putting it to you that in a discussion between two people of a particular culture and region, it's inaccurate to impose your interpretation in relation to that aspect.
Again, are we talking about workplaces or outside workplaces? If it's outside of workplaces, that is a different matter. In a workplace, there are particular rules about how you engage. I think the other thing one has to take into account is that this is possibly one of the most thorny and contested areas in South Africa, are these questions about culture and the Constitution.
Yeah.
Is the Constitution the supreme law of the land? Does the Constitution set what are some fundamental or basic values and norms that we should all adhere to? Or does it say, no, we don't? So I think those are the kinds of things that one needs to look at. And as somebody who comes from a different culture, it has certainly long been the norm as well. And this, I think, has been the criticism that, and this is another stereotype, this idea that when women say no, they mean yes, and therefore you should persist. It
Okay.
is not
Yes, ma'am.
unique.
Please don't bastardize the suggestion I'm making of respect. I know exactly, I know exactly in what cases a no means no. I'm just raising an issue to that may be an oversight on your part. Please don't reduce what I'm saying to suggest that I don't understand circumstances when a woman says or a man says no, they mean a no. I was just saying to you, your analysis may be deficient when you are analyzing a conversation between two people about a subject matter that has cultural implications in how it's handled. That's all I was saying. And your reference to the Constitution is a little offensive because you are suggesting that in the notions I'm telling you, those notions of cultural interactions are somewhat inferior or violate the Constitution. I was not suggesting that.
That's not what I'm suggesting either.
Okay. So do you accept with me? The Constitution does not talk about what we're talking about here. Courting, flirting. It doesn't. So I don't know how you brought it up.
This is what I was talking about with blurb. One person's courting and flirting might be another person's harassment. This is precisely why we end up having sexual harassment matters, because the one party will say, but I was simply appreciating her. I was simply complimenting her. And the other party will say, that is not how I felt. That is not how I experienced it, and what it was unwelcome to me.
Yes.
That is precisely why we have these disputes, because there is contestation over what is it you want, who determines what you want, how do you communicate what you want. So we try to find ways in which we can arrive at some kind of more or less a set of norms.
Yeah.
Where we can interpret and understand each other. The Constitution attempts to try and do that.
Yeah, but I'm going to move from this subject. All
right, before you move from it, when Mr. Sikhakhane put those three concepts to you in relation to courtship and how they may be put in practice, you said, here you are talking about a work relationship. Your suggestion then that the work relationship trumps all those practices, or you are not saying that?
I'm saying this is why it gets very tricky. Is because you have a workplace that sets out one set of rules, and then this is where it becomes so difficult, is you have a workplace that has quite clear sets of rules. The professional, that is, you are supposed to keep separate from the personal. And then when the personal comes in, it can be in conflict with the professional. And that is where the dilemma can sometimes arise, is which do I respond to?
Yes, yeah. Well, if your answer is that there is a dilemma, then that's sufficient answer. Because I just wanted to know whether you are saying that the work situation trumps those cultural...
it creates conflict.
Yes, all right, that's fine. And before we move on, can we just for the record, please, Mr. Sikhakhane, just spell out those three concepts in writing so that when people transcribe the record, they don't create their own words.
Yes, I will try and assist. And I'm no expert in the three of them, but I know how to spell them.
Yes. Yeah. Please spell them for those who are going to transcribe the record.
Yes, I will do so too. Yes, and you know in this case, and I think it's on the record that we're not finished with a policy that regulates that in this particular case.
No, no, you're not.
Yeah. So it's an area that is unregulated. But as I said, all I wanted you to understand, at least to agree with me, is that this entire conversation requires an expert in order to interpret what people are doing and saying, to also be aware that it has its own cultural insinuations that are more important than the experts' idiosyncrasies and views.
There is certainly culture to be taken into account, but culture is not the only thing that is at play here.
I didn't say so.
Yeah, so I think that is what one has to bear in mind, is that culture is clearly an important factor, but it is not the only factor.
Yeah.
So there are other things that can be looked at in addition to that.
Please assume that I know those basic things about life. And then if we get to, let's get to the yes or no. Yes in perpetuity or no in perpetuity. I know this may not change your view. If I told you that in the record, the complainant, and I'll take you to page 1265 of the record.
You'll have to give me a date. I don't have numbered.
Oh, you've got them as dates. I think it's 9 October 2021, the conversation. 1265 specifically. It's a conversation at 13 minutes past 9, 21:13.
Yes?
You see that, oh yeah, sorry, Chair, sorry. 1265.
Thank you.
You may or may not agree with this. It's that conversation. Yes. It's a discussion. It's a conversation they are having about a very important case about consent.
Okay, so it's the 14th of October,
Yeah.
the Kokoro matter.
Yes. And the complainant's views are expressed there about consent. In fact, I think she says that once, and I'll read, ifundisa xokela ukuba ebeyazile complainant ngokwangoku ya ukuba ukuthi yes kwakhe koyokuqala akho boundaries for next, one thing led to another wethu. Says if he agreed at the beginning, there are no boundaries after that. There is no after that yes. What's your comment with the complainant's views? Because she differs with you on the perpetuity or non-perpetuity of a yes. She says this woman who ended up in this situation, raped by someone who claims, no, you agreed that I kiss you. Her view on this issue is that the first yes meant no boundaries after that. It's interpreted in page 1331 if you want to get the English version. And I can read it to you. It says, it teaches you to be suspicious. If the complainant knew then that when you say yes to the first request, then there will be no boundaries for the next. Those are her views on yes.
I did look at this and was thinking, there are two ways to interpret that. The one is say that if you do allow someone to touch you, then whatever happens thereafter is you've given permission to. Or the other way to interpret what she's saying is that if I say yes, then it's assumed that I'm saying yes to everything thereafter. So I read that as saying potentially two things. It's a bit ambiguous.
Am I wrong, Ms. Lisa Vetten, that actually every time we interpret what she says, you are more sympathetic towards her, to
No.
interpret it sympathetically than you do with the respondent?
No, I'm saying there are two potential interpretations here. Either one could be rare. Either one could be right. This is one of these occasions where you have to say to her, what did you mean?
It's fine. I'll leave that. I'm going to go to...
Because I can agree with you. She's not entirely sympathetic to the complainant. That's how I would agree with you.
That's why I was leaving it, Ms. Lisa, because as an intellectual, I expect you to have a much more open discussion with me than evasive. So, but I'm happy if that's the... Because I think those views are at odds with your view.
Which view?
Now, I'm saying if she says a yes, is a yes in perpetuity. If that's one of the views.
As I said, there are two ways you can read this. If you yes to the first request and there are no boundaries for the next, it means you have said yes to everything else. That is certainly the one interpretation you can place on it. The other is if you do say yes to something, it's going to be taken to mean that you've said yes to everything else. Two meanings. She would have to clarify which one she meant.
All right. She would have to clarify. That's why we get back to the point that actually it's important to establish from her what she means about things, rather than to interpret them sympathetically or not sympathetically from a distance. It makes the point I was making to you about faced with what your interpretations of what she does. I see now that you, for some reason, now you respect the fact that it would depend on her. And that's what I was saying to you earlier, is that faced with what she says and does, we've got to give weight, as you do now, to her intentions and what she means. This is a 42-year-old woman, smart, divorced, has been through life, and knows what she means, and says what she means, and means what she says. You and I have no reason to doubt it. Do you disagree with me?
No, but that doesn't mean she always knows exactly what she wants. I mean, we must assume that she went from a position of not saying anything to laying a formal complaint. Clearly that shows that she has changed her position.
How do you know that?
Well, presumably she would have gone to lay the charge at the first
I'm
time
saying,
she was
how
offended.
do you know that sometimes she knows what she means, sometimes she doesn't?
Well, we assume if she's gone to report now, she now knows that that's what she wants to do.
No,
That's all I'm
saying
trying to
as a
say. is that her
person, how do you make the conclusion that sometimes she knows what she wants, sometimes she doesn't?
No, what I'm saying is what she wants might change over time. At the time, she didn't lay a charge. She then laid a charge. So her thinking has changed over time.
Can you dispute the fact that as an adult, employee, educated person, we must respect that she knows what she wants, she means what she says, and she says what she means? You and me have no particular legitimate reason to doubt her unless we state why. She's no imbecile.
No, of course not. Well, if you look at her, the WhatsApps here, and if you look at her testimony, she does say to you, sometimes I am playing along. So sometimes she's saying, I am doing something different to what I am saying.
Yes, that is the part I said you would have known better and analyzed better as an expert had you seen or heard through when those statements are tested in cross-examination. You agree with me that, and I don't dispute what you're saying. I'm saying your analysis would have been enhanced and more objective and more complete had you had sight of what exactly did she say when those things were challenged. Did she concede? Did she say the opposite of what we are saying? In this tribunal, not when they are flirting. Because I accept that you say when they are flirting, because one is a judge, the other is not. Therefore, I'm saying if I were to show you, if you had read the cross-examination, it would have enhanced your analysis and would have impacted on some of the things you assume because you don't know what she said and what she considered.
There are some things she did concede, but I think the substance of, I would not change the substance of what I said, having gone through the record. There are places where she disputes your interpretation, says something different, remains committed to her interpretation. So she does not give way on everything.
You would not change your view even if you see what you have not seen. It's a bizarre statement.
No.
You would not change. You don't know what you've not seen.
I went through the record last night. So now I have seen it. I cannot comment on a lot of the cross-examination about was there a grammatical error, does the full stop look the same, why are there two statements? That is not something that is for me to comment on. It's not for me to comment on whether or not WhatsApps were cropped or weren't cropped, what time things were. That falls outside what I'm doing. What I was looking at is where you are cross-examining her around what she said.
I'm saying, ma'am, when you gave us the report and when you gave your evidence in chief, you had not had that access. It's an ex post facto analysis you are making.
I had skimmed through it, and I had listened to what was said in the media, which was essentially the judge president saying, yes, we had flirtatious conversations, but I thought it was I thought it was reciprocated and was flirtatious. That seemed to, and in the opening of the evidence leaders' statement, she also makes a fairly similar comment that he assumed it was flirtatious and was returned. When I go back and look at the testimony of asking for photographs, those were repeated requests. My opinion doesn't change that he asked repeatedly for a photograph and she didn't give it to him, no matter how many times it was repeated. I don't see any reason to change that. There were also the times where she was repeatedly asked about what is her favorite sexual position. She does not specify, oh, I like X, Y, and Z, and I like it like this in that conversation. And I also looked at the areas where I identified that she is engaging with him, and they're the same as the areas where you identify her as engaging with him. So on that.
Yeah, all I'm saying, ma'am, is what we established yesterday. I'm saying it would have enhanced your analysis, your evidence in chief, and your report. That's all I'm saying.
Possibly.
You must agree with me that when you've not looked at a particular aspect of the record, your analysis is incomplete. You must agree with me. It can't be that you undermine what you've not read. You don't know what you've not read. And I'm telling you now that reading the record on cross-examination would have enhanced, I don't even say, would have enhanced your analysis.
It certainly would have given me a clearer sense of where you are heading.
Yeah, I'm assuming, Ms. Vetten, I'm making this conversation, I'm going to stop it. I do it because I'm assuming that you are not the complainant's witness in these proceedings.
No, I'm not.
You are the witness to assist us with concept, to analyze for us, to assist us, not to support any party. That's why I'm engaging with you. When I make this point and you duck it, I'm not sure why, because I'm saying to you, you must agree that not being furnished with certain things, or not having access, or not having read a particular aspect of this case, particularly how we, in proceeding like this, test the veracity of claims, renders or may render your analysis deficient, your conclusions inchoate.
I don't agree. I think it would certainly have given me another perspective, but I think on my conclusions is, did he repeatedly ask her for photographs? And did she provide him with a photograph? Did he repeatedly ask her about sexual positions? Did she say no to him? That would not change.
I don't think we should proceed in this manner. Mrs. Vettel, the question is, you admitted you had not read
Yes.
some material,
Yes.
such as cross-examination. You had not read the respondent's affidavit and the like. The question is, do you agree that had you read those things, they could have enhanced your report?
They could have.
Please, yes.
Thank you. Can I take you to the conversation about pictures, right?
May
it's a
I
con-
go to the bathroom?
Oh, yes, by all means, yeah. Maybe, Chair, I think she...
You might not be the only one.
I think she speaks for
Let
most
us
of
come
us.
back at 12.
Okay.
At 11. Chair, that's a 2-hour, 1 hour. You've just given us 1 hour, 15
sorry.
minutes.
I'm sorry. I withdraw that. At 11 o'clock, please.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn now.
So, bye.